welcome to the 2025 National Wilderness Skills Institute. My name is Caitlin Deverona. I'm with SAWS, and I'm also a member of the National Wilderness Skills Institute planning team. I'm calling in from North Carolina today. I am really excited to welcome you all to this wonderful virtual event. Many of us have just wrapped up our in-person regional trainings to kick off the 2025 field season. But I think it is just really special to continue to hold this space in the squares for an opportunity for our entire community to connect and to learn from one another, not only across the country, but around the world. So on behalf of the entire planning team, thank you so much for taking time from what I believe is probably a hectic and very busy schedule that you all have to learn with us here at the National Wilderness Skills Institute. So before we kick off with our keynote speakers, I'm going to share some of our NWSI community agreements. So as we just heard, the National Wilderness Skills Institute is a grassroots effort. It's powered by multiple agency staff, nonprofit partners, dedicated volunteers, and individuals from across our public lands community. So NWSI isn't owned by or led by just one organization, but it really thrives through this co-leadership and co-collaboration. And we're adopting every year to meet the needs and the evolving needs of our stewardship community. So there is a shared passion that unites the planning team here. Stewardship, wilderness, and wild and scenic rivers, caring for our public lands and protected areas globally, and also building meaningful connections around these really special spaces. So NWSI is committed to growing and reaching a broader audience and a more inclusive audience each year, staying true to its mission. So we're offering trainings, connection, and community that's really welcoming to everyone. So therefore, we're asking all of our community members to engage in some of the following. So you can see it up here on the screen. We're asking folks to be open, curious, and kind. Throughout our sessions, we're asking folks to listen and seek understanding, maybe speak your truth, but also listen to the truths that might differ from yours from others. We're asking to make space and to take space. So if you're one who raises their hand a lot, maybe try to keep it down and let someone else speak. And if you're someone who doesn't offer their question or opinions, maybe I encourage you to reach out and share this time. We're asking folks to create a space where we're all learning and where we're all wise. So this is one of my favorite things about the trainings and the WSIs across the country is that the knowledge that we're sharing does not come from just one individual or one organization, but that it's really a community where sometimes you show up as the participant and sometimes you're showing up as the trainer and the instructor, and we all get to share those roles. And together we know a lot and can do some really good stewardship out there. And then lastly, our stories stay. Maybe someone shares a personal story in confidence, but the lessons can be shared outside of NWSI. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speakers. It is an honor to get the opportunity to introduce these two speakers who I'm a big fan of and look up to deeply. They're going to help us kick off this year's National Wilderness Skills Institute. So I'll start by introducing Harrell. Meryl brings deep federal leadership experience. She was the former Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at USDA, served in the federal public land leadership under 2 administrations, as well as multiple public land leadership roles in the private and nonprofit sector. And Meryl also is currently leading efforts to launch a Friends of the Forest Service organization to support the agency across all departments. And then next, I'll introduce Lisa Jennings. Lisa is a powerhouse for on-the-ground public land stewardship. She is the Recreation and Trails Program Manager for the Grandfather Ranger District here in North Carolina. She's also the chair of the Chiefs Wilderness Advisory Group, or called WAG. This is a National Forest Service group. And then Lisa also does a lot of leadership roles, a few of which are she's supporting the Recreation Program Manager role at the forest level, really leading the charge on some post-disaster recovery efforts here in North Carolina, impacts from Hurricane Helene, and then also plays a strong supportive role in the recreation economy development in my town that I live in Old Fort, North Carolina. So I'm really excited because both Meryl and Lisa really embody kind of different yet really deeply connected perspectives on the work that we all do. So kind of from federal policy to field implementation. So today's conversation, we'll ask a couple questions and hear from them about the enduring power of stewardship in wild and scenic rivers and wilderness areas, what it takes, why it matters, and kind of where we're going from here. All right. So I'll kick off with the first question and hand it over to them, and feel free to add anything about yourself that I may have missed, because I know there's so much more to share. So I will kick it off with the question, what does wilderness and wild and scenic river preservation mean to you personally, and how has that meaning maybe evolved over your time here? So if you don't mind, Meryl, I'll hand it to you first.
That sounds great. And maybe I'll just start by saying it's so great to see so many friends and leaders. And I just really appreciate each of you and all of the work that you're doing every single day. And excited for the great sessions and training coming up. So thanks for inviting me to join. Um, I originally read your question as what does wilderness and wild and scenic rivers mean to me? So I do want to take just a minute and say, I was just reminded of how special our wild places are. Just last month, I got to go to the Gila National Forest for the first time, and I was in the Gila Wilderness. Was backpacking for 2 nights, and for me, it's an opportunity to breathe, and it's an opportunity to um, feel a part of something bigger than myself and to feel wonder and joy. And it being out there really reminded me of that. And now, after having spent so long working with so many of you for wilderness and wild and scenic river stewardship, it also was such a reminder of being able to look around and see that work and the importance of that work everywhere, every minute of my time out there, from the road going into the access point to the visitor center on the way in, and the volunteers that were working to help welcome and receive visitors and make sure people were prepared to have a safe time in the outdoors, to the trails that we were on, to the campsites we were staying at, to the water in the Gila River, to the bear and the other birds and the other creatures that we saw out there. All of that takes care and takes stewardship. And so having the opportunity to give back and be a part of that and make sure that these wild places are taken care of, and are there for us in the future, for all the reasons why they matter so much, was really special, just to reground in how important all of that is. So I'll stop there, and Lisa, I'll share it with you now.
All right. Thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Caitlin. And yeah, I just want to start with, I'm just honored to be up here, speaking to all of y'all who do the amazing work out there and sharing the stage with Meryl and Caitlin and Dusty and the rest of the planning team and these folks that I've also looked up to my whole career. I'll tell a little bit about my personal journey in preservation, because I feel like we all have this personal journey, and that has shaped how we guide our own careers through preservation, and how we talk to the public, and how we live our lives out there. Probably like many of y'all, my introduction to wilderness and wild and scenic rivers and public lands was as a kid, right? I love hiking. I love backpacking, and that love came from my parents. I have family spread across the country, and that's how they kind of moved around. And I have family in Colorado. And so when we went to Colorado, we'd go into the national forest, we'd go into Rocky Mountain National Park and go hiking. And at that time, my parents were teachers. It was because it was the cheap thing to do on vacation, right? You stay at family and you go hiking and you experience your public lands. And that's the beauty of the thing we manage, right? Especially I feel that every day is that we are managing the public's resource and what makes our country great and what makes it accessible to all who at least have that ability to travel to those small places, whatever means possible. I myself never thought I would get into this field. I was an art major when I went to college, and I love telling that story because I think art and that vision permeates what we also do in preservation and especially in wilderness. I'm not very good at art. That didn't last long. And I realized that what I really love is the outdoors and trees in the forest, and have this moment in the redwoods in California of I want to help care for these lands. Whatever those lands are, whatever they look like. And had only known about these protected areas through, the map searches, right? In college, you see a wilderness area and that's where you want to go. Those are the special places that, you want to visit. And now as a land manager, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why there's so many people here, because they're doing the same thing I was doing in college, right? But, I really think that looking at preservation as the art form of what we do as land managers, and with wild and scenic rivers and wilderness, that's where that art and the patience that it takes to do the right thing is so important in everything we do, right? We are all taught the patience of analyzing what is needed and then taking a step back. And there are not many other things in government service or in the outdoors that we're taught to first take a step back. And that's the beauty and the art form that we all need, especially in these times, to play that long game that's needed for preservation. Because our role is so important, not only for what we're doing now, but, we all think about the preservation and the long game. And I was looking up a few quotes in this, and I wanted to kind of close out my intro with this one because I love it, from Aldo Leopold in his Wilderness Values writing in 1941. The richest values of wilderness lie not in the days of Daniel Boone, nor even in the present, but rather in the future. And that is what we do as preservationists.
Oh, so good, Lisa. I really agree. Thank you for sharing that quote. I feel like both of you hit on something that has really stuck with me with wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. And one, I think, is opportunity. And then another being kind of the simplicity. I love to hear when folks were introduced to public lands as kids. My parents gave me a lot of gifts, but a public land experience was not one of them. And so I didn't really find that adventure until I was a little older. And I think that's why it represents opportunity to me, because being able to go on an adventure or take a risk to go somewhere unknown had really opened up an entire career for me. And now I get to share that with my kids and the future. And but it also really represents simplicity, and that's something I try to tell folks who come into SAS for the first time, or might also be experiencing public lands for the first time, and to just share that it can be such a deep reminder of how profound the simple things in life are, like a hot shower, or having four walls and protection from the elements, or just like a soft bed. Are really nice. Can be going out into wilderness, into the rugged, into the tough, can remind you like, oh, you have everything you need oftentimes at your home or here on earth. So those can be really wonderful things to remind. So thanks for sharing both of yours. All right, I'll move to another question. I'm really curious to hear your perspective. Why do you believe stewardship work is essential to the future of wild and scenic rivers and wilderness? And I will kick it to you first, Lisa.
Yeah. I mean, right. I'm speaking to like the audience here, right? We are the stewards of these areas. And I want to recognize first that stewardship and the work that we do is often goes unappreciated, maybe, or unseen is probably what I'd say, right? Good stewardship work in wilderness and in our wild and scenic rivers is the work that you do that nobody else sees, right? There are the public contacts, there are those pieces, but we're taught that a lot of this, as opposed to management, is how we do the good work to basically allow the wilderness to shine, right? And that's a hard place to be in as a land manager, right? Like sometimes we're doing these projects and they take years, and then you finally see the results on the ground. And that result is that it blends in so much with nature that it's even hard for folks to experience, but so important. Really what we best do is, I think, the social science of stewardship, right? Especially in these areas, our goals are managing human behavior in a way that people don't even realize they're being managed, from, a small change on a trail to keep people away from a really important plant or a really important historical area, to the conversations that we might be having at trailheads about authority of the resource. We are the first responders for the wilderness. And I've had the pleasure actually of having some involvement in the International Ranger Federation this past year, thanks to my role in the Chiefs Wilderness Advisory Group. And one of the things that really stuck with me is this thought that we're all rangers. In the Forest Service, we think of a ranger as, maybe law enforcement, right? The person who's out there enforcing the permits in our areas. But a ranger is so much more than that. A ranger is a steward, it's a manager, it's the public information people, it's the first responders for our natural places. I heard someone say at a meeting for the International Ranger Conference that you wouldn't build a hospital without planning for nurses. So why do we think that we can have natural areas without planning for rangers? And it really hit me that that is what we are, right? We are the caretakers, that support system, and probably like the nurses around y'all, like we're chronically understaffed and trying to do the best we can to care for something that is so important. And so I think that everything we do out there, and especially in this time of change and uncertainty in our agency, is all going to be about balance, right? So I think of stewardship in this moment, in that hospital analogy, as triage, right? What are the most important things? What are the things that are going to have the biggest benefit that will save us in the long term? And how can we focus on those in our stewardship? And how can we be a community to be that support system and that shoulder to cry on? Because that's what we need right now, is we need community. And that's what I see on this call and within these folks who care so much for these areas. We have a wonderful community, and I'm just happy to be part of it. And I just want to say it is important in everything we do, even in the mundane tasks that we might have to do that don't feel important. Those tend to be the most important things for the future. So I'll pause there and hand it over to Meryl.
As usual, I agree with everything Lisa said. No, I think you said it so well. I think, starting with that quote you shared, we are looking towards the future and thinking about how are we taking care of these places now, so that we are preserving their character and enabling them to be there, and for all the reasons for which they were designated into the future. And that does take work. It takes partnership, it takes stewardship. And so being able to come together as a community in the way that this community is doing right now, to share learning, to share resources, to share knowledge, and be able to work together as best we can, to identify what are those most important spaces to invest right now, and how can we work together to take care of those highest area needs, whether it's assessing, doing that wilderness character monitoring, or, addressing that trail that really needs to be rebuilt or stabilized, or any of the other many stewardship tasks that we know each of you do. How can we think about how we can, best deliver those by working together? So um, I think, I'm always now, I started by saying when I'm out there, I can see all of that now in a way that, it is often invisible. So I'm always, when I'm out with my kids, pointing out all of the things that need to be done in order to steward these wild places. Hopefully we by doing that, we can help bring to life what it means to share in the responsibility for stewardship going forward.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Yes, I think that some of the best ways to care about wilderness and wild and scenic rivers and all these beautiful wild scenic lands are through stewardship, and also through research and knowledge seeking. So you could spend a lot of energy and a lot of time learning all of the great ways that wild public lands are contributing to our communities. But for those kinesthetic learners who need to, set foot on a trail or put a tool in their hand, stewardship is kind of that second avenue to really understand and be connected to the wild public lands and better understand how they're serving everyone, in our community, in our country, and around the world, and just like how important that connection is. And so I'm really grateful for all of the stewards out there who are every single day connecting the public, even if it's just one person who sees you out there doing trail work or doing data collection out in the field, connecting them to how important that work is and that it does exist and that folks are out there taking care of it. So thank you, everyone. I'll bring us to our next question. I'm curious to, Lisa touched on it a bit, and I'm curious to learn how the community can balance honoring the long legacy of stewardship, with also the need to adapt and innovate now, and into the future. We're always going to see, new hurdles and new things to deal with. And so how can we best adapt and innovate so we're continuing to honor the legacy of stewardship? And I'll give it to you first, Meryl.
I think it's a great question. And I think starting from what you just reflected on, how are we conceptualizing this work and with whom? How can we be really thinking about who is engaging, who is being empowered to help take care of these places, and how are we doing that? I think that's a really important question. Um, I think a lot of the work over the last number of years has been to evolve our thinking around inside the boundaries, to expand to reach communities where they're at. And I think the Old Fort work is a fantastic example of that. But we were introduced to wilderness and to wild places and to wild and scenic rivers. And each of us, I think, maybe has that story of that first experience. How are we thinking really intentionally about creating those opportunities for others and being able to help build relevance, build connection, um, be able to recognize the wild across the spectrum and use that as a way to kind of build that connection, um, and that long-term care. So I think continuing to evolve how we think about that connection with communities is going to be important in the future. And relatedly, making sure that we are thinking about who has access and where there have been barriers in the past, and being really direct and honest about that, and thinking about how we're going to make sure that we change that future picture of who feels welcomed and safe and included. is a really important part of that conversation. I've also really appreciated over the last number of years the recognition that the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River community has been giving to the importance of these places as ancestral lands, and being able to honor and recognize Indigenous values, perspectives, leadership, and stewardship. I think that's an incredibly important space to continue to focus on it and think about what does that mean for our stewardship into the future. And then maybe one last thought, and I think this might go well. Lisa, it'd be great to hear your current reflections on this, but just recognizing what we're seeing on disaster response and impacts of changes that are we're seeing on the ground. What does that mean from a response point of view? What does that mean from a stewardship point of view? And I think we're only going to see more of that. So really working together to share some of the lessons we're learning in real time, and think about what that means for how we can best be prepared in the future, is I think another really important area to lean into.
Yeah. Thanks, Meryl. And I can kind of start with that. That's a great transition. And I think, my understanding of wilderness has changed so much over the past, 4 or 5 years, especially working with on the Chiefs Wilderness Advisory Group, and understanding that wilderness is in flux. And our understanding of what wilderness is and who's involved in wilderness is also in flux. The examples Meryl were sharing of what does it mean to be wilderness, right? I mean, we know at an ecological level, wilderness and our forests are always constantly changing, right? And that's the beauty of these preserved areas, is you can see that change. But at the same time, society is changing, our views are changing, and our outside influences are changing in a way that we don't have control over, right? So I'll talk a little bit about Hurricane Helene here, and I think of that as, a natural weather occurrence, but an outside influence that, there's nothing you can do about it when it hits at that scale. So I imagine most of y'all are familiar with Hurricane Helene and its impacts to the Asheville area, Western North Carolina. The district I manage in the Linville Gorge Wilderness, which is my background sign here, sits on the Blue Ridge Escarpment, which is the edge of the mountains where it meets Asheville, where Mount Mitchell, the highest peak in the east, hits the foothills going down to the ocean on the East Coast. And this was the epicenter of rainfall and impacts for Hurricane Helene. So 30 inches of rain, 100-mile-an-hour winds recorded on our highest peak in an area that is far inland. And, with a lot of topography that had huge effects across our landscapes. And of course, our impacts to our communities were the first things we thought about. But the idea of what is going on in the forest was on people's minds from day one. And how are those resources that are the reason why people love living here so much? And that escape from getting out of those cities where you can see the destruction, and thinking about getting back in the woods and in our wilderness and in our wild and scenic rivers, because that's where we get solitude. That has been critically, critically important. In October, when this hit, I had no idea how we would address this within our wilderness. My program here, and I'm embarrassed to say this as the WAG chair, our crosscut saw was sitting rusty on the wall of our work center. We had 2 of them. Every so often, someone would go out and, play with them, but they were not ready to go. We've relied on our partners. We've relied on SAWS, which has been an amazing partner over the past 2 decades to do the work in the wilderness. But in that moment when people were limited in how they could travel, we had huge safety concerns. I wasn't prepared, right? And I've learned a lot about what that means to adapt and to always have those resources in place. So in that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I only have a rusty crosscut on the wall and I have some support from saws, but we don't have funding for this off the bat. How do we do this? Everybody's mind went to prohibited uses, right? I mean, that's how we react in crisis. And I've had some of my mentors, and when we talked through this as a WAG, we said, what have other people done? This is not a unique thing. These events are coming at us faster. We've seen them in Hurricane Maria. We've seen them after fires and floods. How can we learn from this beautiful community of first responders how we can do this? And so we started gathering examples from around the country as our dream team on SAWS, which was we set up basically a team. The timing was great on disaster and emergency response. And we're able to pull these examples from different regions. And we found some consistencies in how people have been successfully able to respond within our wilderness stewardship framework. And those include time, right? Thinking back, what is the long game? Take a step back. Oh my gosh, we have a crisis. Take a breath, take a step back. And that time being supported by leadership, right? To be able to take a step back and assess the situation. So in the calls, we said, hey, if we had as many people who could operate chains or crosscut saws as we do who could operate chainsaws on this forest, we could do it. It's not an issue of what's possible, it's an issue of resources. And we're able to mobilize 20 crosscut sawyers from around the country. A few folks on the WAG came down and address our damage within the wilderness to a point where our burden for chainsaws was lessened, right? And so setting these examples of where we can do it, even in this climate of it being hard to get resources, we were able to use the priority of disaster response to mobilize resources and make wilderness a priority in that, right? I always think, especially right now, it's what are the priorities? And those are set above our heads. I have no control of that as a district program manager, right? But what I do have control of is how I prioritize my work on the ground and use creative solutions to make it a priority within that set that's given to us. Somebody once said to me, if you're going to be successful in this agency, learn to work with it and not against it. And that's always stuck with me. Where is the funding? Where are the partners? Where is the work? And where have people done this well in the future? And we can always get something done. It might not be our perfect solution, but we can do the right thing for these areas. So I will say, I hope that work inspires others as they go forward, because I think in a climate of scarcity, we tend to go back to what's easy. And it's all about timing and remembering what you are as a protected areas manager. What's the need? Take a step back and let's play the long game, because we can get through this together.
Really well said, Lisa and Meryl. Thank you guys so much. I think you're so right that in order to balance and honor the long history of stewardship, one has to be able to adapt and be innovative. And that doesn't mean not holding the line or not doing the preservation, but continuing to think, with the resources I have, how can I build the next thing to continue to strong stewardship forward? And so you guys mentioned some really great examples. I think saw that as well in response to Hurricane Helene. I think in years past we really focused on wilderness, and right after the hurricane, if you could get a land manager on the phone, we're not even talking about trails, we're not even talking about roads. I mean, we're talking about life and safety. Communities are a wreck. All the communities here have undergone extreme examples. And so what am I going to do with my staff? All we do is trails and wilderness. And so in one way we were able to adapt in the moment is, well, let's go steward our communities, and let's go out, and we've got to clean up debris. We've got to tear down walls of businesses. Let's be there for the elementary schools and our businesses and our communities so that we can all together um, rebuild and come back, and then be able to go outside and enjoy the trails later on. And so that's a way to adapt. And then maybe now we're able to, like, okay, we can broaden our stewardship. We have so many trails that need help and to be rebuilt or repaired. So we can broaden our stewardship to do focus on more across our public land. And then maybe later on, as resources allow, we hone in back to the very most remote wilderness sections. And so I think being able to adapt to what's going on is how we can continue to honor that legacy of stewardship. I think you both were really right there. Thank you so much. All right, we have about 6 minutes left, so I'm excited to maybe wrap up with um, a message of hope. If you could share with our stewardship audience, what gives you hope right now in this work, and maybe we can take a little nugget for us for the next couple days here. Maybe I'll let Lisa start us off.
Yeah. I have two things. I think, just recognizing that we're in a challenging time for stewardship, right? And I'm going to use the hurricane as an example, but use whatever example is relevant in your life. We all go through these stages of grief in our work and in our lives. When this hurricane hit, I felt like I was in such a great place with how we managed our district. And I've been thinking through this a lot. It's like, right, you're in denial, you have anger, then you're like bargaining, what can't I do? I can still do everything. And then we have that sense of loss, on the things we know we can't do. But eventually we get to acceptance, right? And just know that we'll be there, and the work that we can do right now is just as important as the work that we could do a year ago, because we are the people who know how to make the right decisions for those landscapes, because we're the people who are out there doing that good work on the ground. In the wilderness community in particular, one of the beautiful things I love about the Wilderness Act is that everything's a trade-off and everything's an interpretation. And we're so good at thinking, like, how do you pull, naturalness versus, opportunities for unconfined recreation, and balance these two things that seemingly are at odds, or whatever wilderness character you're dealing with. That is the thing we excel at. And so lean into that, lean into how you balance your work, lean into how you accept your trade-offs, because we'll get through these times of uncertainty. We'll get through what we need to do. We're playing the long game here, and that gives me hope.
I love how you both describe reacting and adapting in that time of stress and challenge. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. I also find a lot of hope in the idea of playing the long game, that the seeds we're planting now will have those returns in the future. And, staying with the Hurricane Helene example, there were so many people who were part of previous WSIs, some of the early WSIs, who had received training or who had helped lead that training, who then were able to return and help bring that crosscut saw capacity and be able to help support being able to deliver what was needed, and be able to support communities, support the resource, because of previous investments in building that capacity for the future. So I think about, what we do now and how we navigate the spaces we're in, and continue to invest in the future and continue to invest in each other will show up, and will matter. And that is what will help us be in the long game, and deliver that into the future. So that gives me so much hope. And this community continues to give me hope and inspiration. Both of you continue to do that. And I think one of the beautiful things about this, and I think the planning team leads shared this in the early video, none of us can do this alone. None of us is, as smart as we are together. So building this community of practice, being able to support one another, give each other energy, learn together, is what gives me hope. And I think it's a space of just energy and opportunity for all of us. So yeah, this just what we're doing here together gives me a lot of hope and joy.
Yes, I completely agree, Meryl. Coming off, it can has been a few hard months here in my world with just a lot of different pressures, a lot of turbulence and in the environment and otherwise. And I think going to WSI in person the last couple weeks and seeing, 100 people in my local community and then coming here to the National Wilderness Skills Institute, just this space where everyone is willing to learn and willing to learn new skills and share new skills and really with this kind of shared goal of bettering and stewarding our wild public lands can give so much hope for the future. And I think you said it so well, Meryl, too. If you have to plant the seeds and continue to invest in the next generation, continue to invest in these spaces where we can come together and learn, and find ways to be adaptive and innovative together, provides a lot of hope in this space. And so, with that, I really want to thank you two so much from the bottom of my heart for being here and sharing your wisdom with the group, kicking us off right, setting a great tone for the next 2 days. It really means a lot. I know you two are very busy, and thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom today. It means a lot.